Welcome to a series of videos where we are going through all of the questions from the media tour last October, back before we knew the expansion was delayed, back before we had a live letter, back before we had the patch notes, and back before Shadowbringer servers went offline, which they are at this exact moment when I am filming, so that I have videos ready to go live during Endwalker that you can watch without anything from Endwalker being spoiled, because I don't know any of it yet. And so we are going to have these going live all week long, and I have a bunch more of these to go, probably into next week too. We have done some lore, we have done some technical stuff, and we are now driving into some technical questions around things like hardware and all of that, getting a little more technical still as we get closer and closer to job changes coming down the line. PSU is our very own Chili. We love Chili. He's been big into the podcasts. Mr. Happy, Reddit sends a representative. It's very hard because sometimes the Reddit representative doesn't actually have the question that they're sent there to ask in that particular question. So that's really tough because these things are done verbal instead of it being a typed list with typed back and forth. So the Reddit questions, it's a huge community. It deserves representation, but sometimes those questions really struggle. You all know Mr. Happy. You all know Larry Czar, and Siliconera is a general press site. I will say that Siliconera, if I have any bitterness in my coverage, that is unintentional. Thank you so much for your coverage. I do appreciate and I want more coverage around this game just as a general theme. But the Siliconera in particular, I will freely admit, is the interview that I struggled most with. So any bitterness is my own personal bias showing through, nothing on behalf of Yoshi P and them. So let us start with hardware and programming questions. Chili saying, is there a chance for an in-game calendar? And is it possible to sync that with the phone app? And Yoshi P says that's a great idea. That's a great idea, that the calendar option that would be synced with an in-game and phone app compatibility would make a really nice, smooth experience for players. So, yes, not no. Just, oh, well, that's a good idea. And so Siliconera asking about launch, which I assume people watching this on YouTube have already taken part in. Have there been any precautionary measures taken with Final Fantasy XIV Endwalker to prevent the issues of Stormblood congestion, especially as the player base and general server population have grown over the years? We are trying to bolster the ability and accept and receive more players coming in. Once you're able to log in, there should not be much of a queue. We have instanced areas. Even in sanctuaries, they have the ability to spin up multiple instances of an area. There might be some issues with queue times, but that sort of thing is when you are in kind of the lobby of a game before you are actually in the game. We definitely want to optimize so that we can have more people hopping in at the same time, going through the login queue to let that process faster, also allowing more people to be on at the same time. But there is a severe shortage of semiconductors right now, so even if we were able to pay for them, there is just physically a lack. My frustration with this question is that since this Stormblood, people referencing Raubon Extreme, we have had almost 5 years of development, and in that time, we have had a smooth launch. We have had smooth patch launches. We have spun up, we now have things where instances, if you guys remember Ixion Fates causing zones to crash, if you guys remember Shadowbringers has had some pretty big patch days, Ishgard Restoration really challenging things like World Visit. We have had these moments, and they have proven each and every time that they are capable of not only seeing them, but when something is unpredictably big, such as the Ishgard Restoration, that the fix happened live, in real time, without a server reset. So where I get frustrated with this question is that Yoshi P answered it very nicely, but the precautionary measures taken for Final Fantasy Endwalker, if you're going to reference since Stormblood congestion, there's already a list. There's already a list. So, yes, there will be struggle getting people into the game as far as queues. That is what it is. But once people are in, they are working hard. At this point, the lodestone has been updated to deal with the fact that they're trying to increase detection for anti-AFK, things that people do. That's technically a breach of terms, to stay on. And then they're going to have an AFK timer because this is a music concert and our favorite band has sold out, which is wonderful. There's so many people that like the same band we do. But if you're going to get up and you're going to go to bed, maybe your chair could be used by somebody else for a time. And so they are going to be kicking people off for AFK. I assume there is a chance that on the 3rd, I'm going to wake up at 2 a.m. I'm going to go log in at 3 a.m. and I'm not going to get in. And that happens. That happens. But, you know, I think some of the Silicon Era questions in general come across as the original text came across as very aggressive. That, like, you know, since you guys sucked way back in Stormblood, and so that is where my frustration with the tone of the Silicon Era article came from. Since you guys sucked 5 years ago and you've gotten so much better since, what are you going to do about that problem you had 5 years ago? And so it's just a tone issue that I have an issue with. And so if you guys have heard me talk about it on stream and things like that, that's where that comes from. Mr. Happy. Skills such as the new inner release stack seem to be adjusted for high ping. Some jobs still hurt players with pings. How do you decide what gets adjusted based on ping and what does not? There's been a couple questions asked on ping. There's been, I think, you know, I don't know, just a handful. And so the response here was they do analyze how a skill or how a job's pacing puts stress on a player. They do analyze that. They don't, however, think about that as addressing ping. It might be affected by ping, but that is not actually the driving factor. And so they talked about it. They talked about how inner release stacks and stuff like that takes pressure off of that. But he didn't really seem to think the inner release thing was to address ping. It was to address uptime. It was to address helping players feel like they don't have to stress about not getting all that in. So, didn't seem to be a ping thing. This is actually a theme. So we have another ping question a little bit later on. And so it seems to be just something in general. Reddit actually asks, are there plans to change the process of downloading and installing the game? As we've had a lot of these new players come in. One of the areas that Silicon Era could have hit on, that is a pain point, that is still a pain point to this day, that their article could have absolutely hit on a very valid, very reasonable complaint within the community, that is not calling fire where there is not one, but is an issue, is that there are plans, you know, the delta between Square Enix and the Final Fantasy XIV team when it comes to purchasing things, when you talk about the Lodestone versus the Square Enix site versus the MOG station, it's all very, very clumsy, as opposed to any of you that have ever played WoW. They're pretty good at taking your money. You boot up the launcher, and then you just do it. It just handles it. And so it's really, really, really nice. He said that some of the adjustments would require changes on the Square Enix things. Some of the adjustments would require things based on legal requirements in various countries. They are aware of the issues, and they have a handful of things that they can still work to adjust on the 14 side, but do not expect wide-scale changes at this time. It would likely be a series of small changes over time. Because keep in mind, Square Enix is a very large publisher. They publish everything from Tomb Raider to Octopath Traveler to Kingdom Hearts to Final Fantasy games and so on. And so they have to deal with that. They also have to make sure that whatever they do, as far as accepting money, they do it everywhere. Some of that I struggle with. You know, sometimes I've struggled with in the past when WoW has said they can't do something because it can't be done, and then Final Fantasy turns around and does it. Some of the, well, you would have to deal with all the payment and legal requirements across the world. And then I look to other gaming companies who seem to be able to accept money from all but a handful of countries, and they handle them differently and separately, and they just manage that. And so I don't have trouble giving my financial information to purchase goods or services from other companies. And Final Fantasy is one that, if you guys have ever been somebody who's turned on and off your account, you may or may not have had a very easy experience with that. If you've ever tried to buy a skip potion or a Fantasia, or you've ever tried to play across multiple platforms, that is something that can be very frustrating within the 14 community. So I would say some of that, like to say it's based on like legal requirements, I guess pay money to somebody else that's worked for a company that's figured that out. And then on the Square Enix things, that's just an unfortunate thing about big corporate structures. That's not a dig on Square Enix or EA or Activision or any of these big companies, but when companies get big, they become big boats in the water, and big boats are not agile. They have the advantage of being able to weather big storms, but and carry lots of people and do big things, but they have the disadvantage of they don't turn and maneuver very quickly, and that's how you end up with a Nintendo that makes phenomenal games for a phenomenal platform, but still for some reason the Nintendo Switch feels like it hasn't quite grasped that the internet is not a fad. So it just struggles. And so that's just the nature of big companies like this. Larry Czar is going to ask about technical debt. Technical debt is something that comes up a lot in these conversations, and it is the ongoing thing that lasts expansion from expansion from expansion. And he just asked point blank, have you overcome the Realm Reborn technical debt? Everything from 1.0 to 2.0. Will there be an engine rework in the near future? We had this question a little bit earlier in a different context, in another one of these videos, and he said, well, we have no technical debt from 1.0 to 2.0 because 2.0 wiped all of that out. However, we do have issues because of choices we made when building 2.0 and the speed in which 2.0 was built. For example, the Summoner, big changes rolling out with Endwalker, is wiping out a lot of things related to Summoner. We've addressed a lot with the way hitboxes are calculated. We've revamped achievements, but we do still need to address the friends list. We do still need to address glamour plates. We try to do things like this in the background. We want to plan for growth over the next 10 years. We will be talking a lot more about this moving forward on what the 10-year plan is. So we will be talking a lot more about the growth, and we expect to hear more from him. I don't know. Historically, every patch 6.1, we would expect to have a part 1 and part 2 of a live letter. Part 1 would be the big overview. Part 2 would take individual sections and show us, maybe show us actual gameplay from the new PvP or something like that, something coming out in 6.1. Maybe walk us through the new housing district, show us the lottery system. And that would be typically how those would work. 2 big, long live letters, 1 big and broad, and 1, hey, some of those things are self-explanatory, so let's focus on a smaller list and dive in. I don't know. Do we get a third live letter that's separate for this? Do we get, there's a part 2 to live letters where they have interviews and things like that. Is that more future-based? I don't know what this looks like. They've never showed us what some game devs would call a roadmap. They've never really planned that far out. And so that would be very, very different. And so we'll see exactly what that looks like. He referenced that in a number of interviews where he talks about this desire to share the 10-year goal and the 10-year plan for this game. And I think that would be something that would help now more than ever give people confidence that 6.0 is not just a finale, that 6.0 really is the closing of a narrative chapter with a new one beginning in 6.1, but the game is healthier, bigger, and better than ever, and is planning long-term for the future. Yoshi has said that he calls this game his life's work, and that he plans on working on this game till he dies. Doesn't mean he'll change his mind and retire or something like that. In the past, we've had an interview question that said, like, you know, if you could work on any game outside of Square Enix, what would you do? But it was asked at a Q&A at a Square Enix event. So, like, he's not going to be like, yeah, these guys suck. And so, like, we don't always get to see behind the curtain. And it doesn't mean that he's not his own person and entitled to retirement and all of that long term. But it doesn't seem that he would step down from Final Fantasy anytime soon. So that is the hardware and programming. Next, we will be talking about technical things relating to content pacing with Endwalker. And then we will move into job changes. So let's get to it.